The 30th of September, 1938, Munich, Germany. In the early hours of the morning, the leaders of Germany, the United Kingdom, France and Italy sit together at the conference table while the fate of Czechoslovakia is decided without its participation. Adolf Hitler, Neville Chamberlain, Édouard Daladier and Benito Mussolini negotiate under intense pressure, driven by the fear of another European war and the desire to preserve peace at almost any cost. No Czechoslovak representative is allowed into the room, and the government in Prague waits for news while the borders of its state are being redrawn. The atmosphere is tense and uncertain, shaped by urgency, diplomatic calculation, and the belief that territorial concession can prevent a larger conflict. Yet, this moment is not sudden. It is the result of months of escalating crisis, political pressure, and carefully constructed demands that have destabilized the region and isolated Czechoslovakia. At the center of this process stands one man, whose actions have helped bring Europe to this point. His name is Konrad Henlein. Konrad Ernst Eduard Henlein was born on the 6th of May, 1898 in Muffersdorf, today's Czech Vratislavice nad Nisou, a small town near the city of Reichenberg, then part of Austria-Hungary. His father, Konrad, worked as an accounts clerk, and his mother, Hedwiga Dvořáčková, came from a family of partly Czech origin, a fact that would later cause Henlein considerable embarrassment. According to some sources, years later, when he was pursuing a policy of strict racial separation in the territory he governed under Nazi rule, he was quietly forced to have his still living mother's surname changed from the Czech Dvořáčková to the more Germanic Dvoráček, so that his own origins would not undermine his authority as the Nazi ruler of the Sudetenland. Henlein grew up in a region where ethnic tension between the German and Czech communities was a constant feature of daily life. Germans in Reichenberg, today's Czech Liberec, regarded Czechs as cultural inferiors, and the resentments of that world shaped Henlein's sense of identity from an early age. He attended a business school in the town of Jablonec an der Neiße, today Jablonec nad Nisou, in the northwestern part of the present-day Czech Republic, and in 1916 he volunteered for the Austro-Hungarian army to fight in the First World War, which started in 1914. He was sent to the Italian front, where he was captured and spent the remainder of the conflict as a prisoner of war. During his imprisonment on the Asinara Island, he developed his earliest ideas about German national identity and the place of Germans in Central Europe. When the war ended in 1918 and the Austro-Hungarian Empire collapsed, the Sudetenland became part of the newly created state of Czechoslovakia. For the German community that had long been dominant in the region, this represented a large blow, as they now found themselves to be a minority in a newly established republic. Unlike its neighbors, however, the Czechoslovak Republic granted members of minority groups the same opportunities as members of the majority population. They could enter politics, form their own associations or parties, and engage in so-called public affairs. In this atmosphere, Henlein returned from captivity and worked first as a bank clerk, then from 1925 as a gymnastics instructor. During this time, he also met the cafe owner's daughter, Emma Louisa Geyer, whom he married in 1926. Henlein was also very active in the Deutscher Turnverband, a German nationalist athletic organization, and by 1931 he led this gymnastics association, which became more militaristic. Sport became for Henlein what it had been for nationalist movements across Central Europe, a vehicle for building identity, loyalty, and discipline among a community defined by ethnicity rather than citizenship. In 1933, the same year Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany, Henlein founded the Sudeten Deutsche Heimatfront, meaning the Sudeten German Home Front. The timing was not coincidental, and Henlein followed the Nazi successes in Germany and was hoping to achieve similar political victory in Czechoslovakia. During this time, the Czechoslovak state was defending itself, and in 1935, under pressure from the Czechoslovak government, Henlein's organization was renamed the Sudeten Deutsche Partei, meaning the Sudeten German Party. In the parliamentary elections of May 1935, with substantial financial backing from Berlin and the Nazi party that Henlein publicly denied, the Sudeten Deutsche Partei won 15.2% of all votes cast in Czechoslovakia and became the strongest single party in the country. In the elections, Henlein and his party received approximately 2/3 of the German vote in Czechoslovakia, but they remained in the opposition in the parliament. In his public speeches during these years, Henlein presented himself as a moderate politician, a man seeking fair treatment for his community within the framework of the Czechoslovak state, not its destruction. In private, however, he was receiving money and direction from Nazi Germany regarding his politics against Czechoslovakia. Yet, Henlein continued to cultivate the image of a reasonable man with legitimate criticisms against the Czechoslovak Republic. He spoke of a Central European common space, of reconciliation between Germans and Czechs, and of cultural coexistence of these two nations. But behind this language, his party discouraged its followers from buying from Czech or Jewish businesses, used the code phrase Christian worldview to signal anti-Semitism, and maintained close organizational ties to the Nazi movement across the Czechoslovak-German border. At the end of March 1938, following Germany's annexation of Austria, which took place a few weeks earlier, Henlein met secretly with Hitler in Berlin. The strategy they agreed upon was simple and ruthless. The Sudeten German Party would issue demands so extreme, so carefully designed to be unacceptable, that the Czechoslovak government could never satisfy all of them. So Nazi propaganda would be able to portray Czechoslovakia as a hostile state oppressing the German minority. One of the goals of this tactic was to increase the unwillingness of France to go to war for a state that seemed unlikely to last. Second was to create a crisis that would provide Hitler with a pretext for military intervention against the lonely Czechoslovakia, where Nazi Germany would be ready and Czechoslovakia without allies. On the 24th of April, 1938, Henlein's party published its demands in the form of a so-called Karlsbad-Programme, calling, among other things, for full autonomy for the German-speaking regions of Czechoslovakia. When the Czechoslovak government offered significant concessions, Henlein simply raised his demands further. The mechanism was working exactly as intended by Nazi Germany. Through the summer of 1938, Henlein worked to cultivate sympathy among foreign visitors who came to Czechoslovakia in an effort to resolve the crisis. He proved particularly effective with Lord Runciman, the British mediator sent to investigate conditions in Czechoslovakia in August 1938. Runciman left deeply sympathetic to the Sudeten German position, having absorbed Henlein's carefully curated account of Czechoslovak oppression, and with it also Nazi propaganda. Meanwhile, the German military intelligence, the Abwehr, was working with Henlein to plan an uprising in September 1938 in the Sudetenland that would justify German military action against Czechoslovakia. The plan included having Sudeten German Party members dress in police uniforms to stage provocations and assassinations. When Hitler delivered a threatening speech regarding Czechoslovakia at the annual Nazi Party rally in Nuremberg on the 12th of September 1938, Henlein's organization launched hundreds of terrorist attacks and 2 coup attempts across the Sudetenland. Czechoslovak forces suppressed the uprising within days, and Henlein fled to Germany to avoid arrest. From there, he organized the Sudeten Deutsches Freikorps, a paramilitary force that conducted cross-border raids and further violence into the Czechoslovak territory. The crisis reached its climax at the end of September 1938. On the 30th of September, around 2:30 in the morning, at a conference in Munich attended by Germany, Britain, France and Italy, Czechoslovakia was told to surrender the territory of the Sudetenland and some other border regions. Czechoslovak representatives waited in a room situated outside of the meeting place, while the fate of their country was decided without them. The agreement gave Hitler everything Henlein had demanded on his behalf and more. On the 1st of October 1938, German troops entered the Sudetenland, and Henlein followed them, appointed by Hitler as Gauleiter, the regional Nazi Party leader of the newly created Reichsgau Sudetenland. He moved into a villa in Reichenberg, today's Liberec, that he had confiscated from a Jewish businessman, and it became his home until the end of the war. The mask of the moderate politician was now entirely removed, and on the night of the 9th of November 1938, Henlein organized the Kristallnacht pogrom in the Sudetenland. Jewish homes and businesses were attacked. Synagogues burned to the ground across the region, including Teplitz, Reichenberg, and Troppau, which are today cities Teplice, Liberec, and Opava in the Czech Republic. Henlein drove a campaign for the complete removal of Jews from the Sudeten economy and territory, confiscating businesses and properties under the Nazi policy of Aryanization. By the time the Second World War began, on the 1st of September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, 90% of the Jews who had lived in the Sudetenland before October 1938 had already fled. Those who remained faced forced labor, deportation to concentration camps, and death. At the time when the Second World War started, Henlein held both party and administrative authority over the region, but his actual power, however, was increasingly limited. Reinhard Heydrich, one of the main architects of Nazi terror and head of the Reich Security Main Office, the main Nazi intelligence organization, regarded Henlein as insufficiently radical and made repeated attempts to remove him from any position of influence. Henlein survived these challenges only because of his personal relationship with Hitler, who retained a degree of loyalty toward the man who had delivered him the Sudetenland. Within the Nazi hierarchy, Henlein was considered a useful instrument, but not a trusted colleague. In 1943, he was promoted to SS Obergruppenführer, an equivalent to a lieutenant general in the US Army, but remained a secondary figure until the end of the Nazi regime. As Germany's military situation collapsed in the spring of 1945, and Soviet and American forces advanced from both directions to Czechoslovakia, the structures Henlein had administered for 6 years dissolved around him. He was captured by American forces in May 1945 near Pilsen, today's Pilsen, in western Bohemia, as he unsuccessfully attempted to negotiate with the Americans, seeking, among other things, recognition of the Munich Agreement by the USA. Soon he realized that no one intended to negotiate with him, and that he was considered a war criminal and would face trial for his role in the destruction of Czechoslovakia, for the persecution of its Jewish and Czech population, and for his years of systematic deception, in the service of Nazi expansion. On the 10th of May, 1945, while in American custody, the 47-year-old Henlein took his own life. Konrad Henlein, the man who helped dismantle Czechoslovakia and pave the way for Nazi expansion, was buried anonymously in a small section of the Plzeň Central Cemetery.
Thanks for watching the World History Channel. Be sure to like and subscribe, and click the bell notification icon so you don't miss our next episodes. We thank you, and we'll see you next time on the channel.